Okay, you should be able to see my screen. Everybody seeing it?
Yes. Perfect.
Excellent. Hold on, getting this bigger. There we go. Minimize here. It's nice to see some familiar faces. Good morning, everybody. All right, so I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about considerations for program proposals, evaluation, and development. There are a zillion ways to develop programs. I've just kind of picked a handful of tips and tricks to get people started. I know that it can seem very intimidating to, try and put your vision onto paper and into words so that you can gain access to the things that you need, whether it be funding or permission to start a program in somebody else's organization, or just trying to figure out what are those things that I need to be looking out for, because there's a lot to be looking for. So I've been teaching this coursework for about 10 years. And over the years, I've had some co-speakers. So I just wanted to kind of put some of their names in here because they've really helped to make a lot of this particular topic a little bit richer. So I'd like to say thank you to all these folks. Our learning objectives today are for you to be able to identify at least 3 resources for continuing professional development so that you will be able to initiate a program proposal for whatever area of animal-assisted intervention that you're interested in. You'll be able to list documents that you need for policies and procedures. Again, this is a 2-day course. And I know that a couple of you that are on here are pretty skilled at program development. So we all can agree how tricky this can be. Your job, your program is sort of what dictates how rich your program development needs to be. For some people, it's very, very extensive. And for other people, it's, 3 or 4 pages. So hopefully you'll be able to figure out some sort of middle ground in there so that you're covering all of the things that need to be taken care of, ethically for your clients, for the animals you work with, for yourself, for your employer, and even for other staff members. But we do want you to become competent in completing a risk assessment and management plan. And this is probably the biggest topic that I like to talk about because I rarely meet people that actually do them. And a lot of employers don't know to actually ask for them. So we'll be able to go over some of that too. So, we have to just kind of think about developing programs in animal-assisted interventions as raising puppies. And so, they start out in their infancy. There isn't very much, going on. There's very isolated areas in which they're comfortable to work in. And then they do those things, and those puppies gain skills and confidence, and then they start growing up until they're a full-fledged program. I think that the key to doing all of this is to take very tiny steps, because when you look at an overall big picture, it can be really intimidating. And a lot of people, once they realize what goes into it, it's like a business plan. It can be so intimidating that people just end up doing one of a couple of things, either walking away because it's just too hard, or saying, I just don't need that. I just want to take my great dog to work, which all of our dogs are great. And we want to make sure that we're, taking care of them and giving them the freedoms that they need and all of that. And if you think about it, that's really what program development is. It's sort of protecting our investment of time. So hopefully we can change your mind to help you get some policies and procedures in place, just a couple of steps at a time. This is something that I developed in 2011 for when therapists, particularly, would like to start doing animal-assisted therapy programs. But it is built to include animal-assisted education and animal-assisted activities. We're going to go over kind of parts of this, but not all of it in its entirety, because different programs would stop at different levels within all of this. But in the big scheme of things, You think about resource building. This is all the stuff that takes place before you start doing your program. Then you move into the preparatory phase. And this is where you're, preparing and starting to do some documentation and information gathering. Maybe you're starting to prepare and train your dog or your horse or whomever to work with you. And then there's a supervision and mentoring. This is really big. I wish everybody could get mentoring or some sort of supervision, and I highly recommend that you try and seek that out. There are so many things that I would like to go back and tell myself 20 years ago. While they were all really great learning experiences, I think I could have saved myself a lot of time and frustration had I had some kind of supervision and mentoring. At the time that I started doing this in occupational therapy, there weren't very many OTs doing this kind of work. So it didn't occur to me until years later that I could go to other disciplines and say, hey, let's talk about this. And I'm just going to modify it to work for whatever my discipline is versus, a mental health provider. So the supervision and mentoring, I think is the greatest part. This is the area that tells you whether or not you are cut out for this. And then we move into the more formal things like animal-assisted therapy or education. And then animal-assisted activities would sort of stop here with maybe a little bit of cross-training. If you're a person who is doing animal-assisted activities, but you want to work with a healthcare professional, there are a lot of healthcare professionals that could use that kind of help. Sometimes, for example, physical therapists and occupational therapists are working with clients that need a lot of physical support. And so we're really kind of busy managing human beings so they don't fall down or fall over or, have seizures or whatever. And so sometimes it's really handy to have a handler come in with their dog to work. In other populations, we prefer that it's more of the triangle model where it's myself, my dog, and my client. And this model kind of works for any of those. So we're just going to take a couple of steps through each one of these tiers. So when we're looking at resource building, I think it's really important that we make a profile on ourselves and try and identify what are the things that are going to be very difficult for us. What are things we either need to learn? What are things we need to hand off to somebody else because it's just not something that's built into our skill set? When I think about creating a human profile, I say, okay, what kind of a person am I in general? We have to think about what do we do in our spare time? How is it that we work? Can we multitask? And a lot of us would like to think that we could multitask, but in some situations, it's really, really difficult. What is our level of animal communication? How do we understand how our animals are communicating with us? How are we able to supervise if there is another therapist that is going to be working with our animal? So we really just nail down those skill sets and say, okay, here's what I know. Wow, I really need more continuing education in, whatever area. But here are the areas of strength and here are my areas of weakness. And it sort of builds a plan so that you can, move forward and take some great coursework for whatever area that you're not feeling comfortable with. So then the next thing that I ask people to do is to really take a look at their own discipline-specific professional requirements and development. All of us have a code of conduct or ethics. We have standards, competencies. There's all kinds of different things out there. There are very few specific disciplines that sort of cater to animal-assisted interventions. APA is one of them, which is really kind of cool. The American Occupational Therapy Association has a section now for that practice area. And so it's great to see that things are developing, but sometimes there are organizations that don't really understand what this is. It's more than just taking your nice dog to work. There's so many things that we have to consider within our code of conduct and how we practice. And, the responsibilities that we have to our clients are frequently the same responsibilities that we're going to have with the animals that we work with. So you want to gather all of that kind of stuff, see what your code of conduct says, what kind of things lend themselves to animal-assisted interventions. And then you want to start thinking about the ethics and privacy. This can be really, really tricky. Doing animal-assisted interventions is such a broad range. There's really so many different people that have so many different meanings to what animal-assisted interventions are. And sorry, I have a little throat thing going on. It's a little tickle. I think it's really important that we sort of review and determine if we're practicing all of those ethics and the privacy practices. You know, it can be a little bit unethical to offer somebody, let's say that you have this really great volunteer visiting team, you're, let's say, a speech therapist, you're doing animal assisted interventions, you're very busy, you don't have your own dog, so you find a really, really great human animal team to come in on, I don't know, Tuesdays and Thursdays to work with you. And you start talking to your client saying, hey, we now have animal assisted therapy available. We have a team that comes in. And so, you know, if you'd like to participate, you just have to agree to have this stranger in your session. Well, that can be really tricky because we have HIPAA Privacy Acts. And so really what we're saying is if you would like this treatment, then you have to be able to accept, you know, these strangers into your sessions and things like that. Now, a lot of people would say, no problem, they don't mind that at all. But there are a certain number of populations that may not be really comfortable bringing a stranger into their session. And granted, you know, I always like to say, well, they're only a stranger until you get to know them. But the fact is, some of us don't like to share our healthcare information. So keep those kinds of things in mind. You know, when you're trying to build a program, whether you're working with your own animal or asking other animals to come in, and how you might introduce those kinds of things, because it can look very different. Also looking at the theoretical foundations of human-animal interactions versus the human-animal bond, and really understanding breed-specific traits. A lot of people say, well, I'm going to go out and get a very specific breed and train it to be a therapy animal. And that can be great. You know, I mean, puppies are great to train, but if you don't understand what it is your dog was built to do, then things can go south very quickly. So understanding your population, you know, your human profile, hey, what is that job description that I'm trying to fulfill here? And hopefully that a dog might fit into, for example. And knowing that, you know, maybe if you're in a skilled nursing facility with a lot of people with walkers that have tennis balls at the bottom, maybe that really ball-driven border collie is not the best choice to do that specific location. But that same dog may be a really, really great choice to work in the juvenile detention center. It's really important that we're thinking about the breed-specific traits and what our dogs are built for so that they will be happy. Because if they're not happy, we have to do a whole lot of management and they're not going to be happy. And so our clients aren't going to be happy. So really think about that kind of thing and investigate what is it that my dog is built for, or my horse, or any other animals that you are planning to work with. And then start looking at continuing education for animal-assisted interventions. There's a lot of really great programs out there. I've listed some of my favorites at the end of this, and you guys will all have access to the PDF of this PowerPoint. But, you know, there's short-term continuing education weekend workshops. Those can definitely have a lot of value, but there's also courses of study where you are working with an organization or an individual for a year or two to make sure that you get all of these practices in place. And then you can graduate out with a certificate or in some cases, certification. But at any rate, it's really, really important that you keep up on your continuing education for animal-assisted interventions, regardless of what area you're working in. It's also really important because you can do a lot of networking. And, you know, I've been doing this for over 20 years now, and it's really great. I have a network of women in the industry where we can all talk about different things. You know, here's what we're reading, here's what we're seeing in conferences. Wow, I've got this kind of a problem. What do you guys recommend? And it's a really nice, safe learning environment where we can all just say, wow, I've exhausted my resources. I need a little bit of additional support here. And so I know I can always hop on Messenger and do my group chat with these women, and they'll always have something to offer for me to try. So this article came out last week. I hope I remembered to send it to Lori for you guys to all get a copy of. This is a journal that you can just download it for free. But this really talks about the relationship between standards and qualifications. And, it's really interesting to see that so many people are practicing their discipline and adding animal-assisted therapy or education into their actual practice with no standards, no competencies, no continuing education. And this article will tell you a little bit more about that. So I would highly recommend that you read that one. But let's talk a little bit about standards and competencies in general. There are several organizations that have competencies that are just sort of out there and free to the public. And you're going to see some more at the later part of this presentation. But APA has competencies. Animal Assisted Intervention International has standards, competencies, and accreditation. Ohio has a white paper. ESAT, they have competencies as well. And so there's, I can't name them all, but I highly recommend that you identify an organization that you are comfortable with and that you read through their standards and competencies and maybe look through more than one. The competencies are there to give you hints about, hey, it might be a really good idea for you to learn about things in this area. And the standards sort of back those up. So standards tell us, here's how we should run programs effectively in a professional manner so that we are protecting ourselves, our animals, our clients, the families of our clients, all of those kinds of things. And I think that I have 2 or 3 different sets of competencies that I know are public domain that will be released to all of you here. There are a couple of other ones I weren't sure if they were public domain, like Risa Van Fleet has some great stuff, but I didn't know I didn't have time to get a hold of her. It was a busy week, but I know that she has some as well. So these are some references that you can also look up to take a peek at different competencies and how they're working. And then, when we were talking about really looking at theoretical foundations, that can seem really intimidating for a lot of people, but really these are just to kind of help you understand where we're coming from in animal-assisted interventions. Things like the Biophilia Hypothesis, which really just says humans are naturally drawn to other species. We tend to just be interested in them. And how many of you have ever said, wow, I cannot date that person or be that person's friend because my dog didn't like them. My dog wouldn't go near them. I think a lot of us have gone through that. Well, that's biocentrism. We get a lot of information from our animals about the entire world. If the dog is barking, hopefully, instead of just shushing them, we're saying, all right, my dog is telling me something's going on outside the window. Let me just check it out. And, then you go from there. But, they're really great judges of character. And it's really interesting to me how many of us base our human relationships on what our animals communicate to us. So when we're talking about the networking and continuing education piece of it, I thought I would list some of the larger ones here, again, that are sort of public. So Animal Assisted Intervention International puts on conferences, Ohio, ISAT. Don't forget about social media. There are all kinds of really great groups. The International Institute for Animal Assisted Play Therapy. This is Risa Van Fleet, and she has several groups. She must be cloned. I don't know how she manages all of these, but if you want to post a question on there and get some ideas, there are so many followers in her groups, you are bound to get some really good information. She also has some really great handouts that you have access to once you've been approved for those kinds of groups. There's also the Society for Companion Animal Studies, and the International Center of Anthrozoology, I think, is another one that is up and coming. You can join here, and it's another place to really just do a lot of networking. They have a lot of videos that you can watch about training and just various topics. Also, don't forget to look out there for some blogs. There are some really great blogs out there that talk about animal-assisted interventions, not just from the dog handler's point of view, but also from the dog's point of view. And while it's anthropomorphic, it can make your wheels turn. And then, of course, Pet Partners has a good networking team and continuing education as well. So, hold on. So other continuing education resources are here. Of course, you have found the human-animal interaction, and I see a lot of you here weekly or every other week, which is great. Oakland University Center for Human-Animal Interventions offers a certificate. University of North Florida also has a certificate. Idaho State University offers a certificate, and Denver University, and then the International Institute of Animal Assisted Play Therapy, Dogwood Therapy Services. And then, so don't forget to look at your own discipline specific areas. Again, if you were doing animal assisted activities, Pet Partners might have some really great stuff for you, as well as some of the other organizations. But for those of you that are therapists and teachers, don't forget to look into your network, your governing body, like at the American Occupational Therapy Association. There's a couple of different areas where we can all network and, ask questions and talk about current events and all of that kind of stuff that is very specific to animal assisted therapy. So then as we're working our way through that first tier of resource building, we want to begin relationship development and socialization with the animal that we're going to be working with. And this is really critical. I think that this area is finally gaining the kind of attention that it needs to. If we think about the animals that we work with and the fact that we're asking them to work in a lot of different areas that they wouldn't be normally naturally working in, we need to make sure that they believe in us, that they can trust us, that we are their secure base of attachment. We need to learn how animals communicate and how best to prepare an animal. Doing talk therapy can be very, very different than doing physical therapy. But they can also have a lot of overlap. And I think this is one of the reasons that it's so tricky to do evaluations of animals for this kind of work, because we all work so differently. Even two occupational therapists working in pediatric sensory integration, who also offer animal assisted interventions, it can look very, very different. But it is really important that you do your due diligence to try and figure out animal communication, preparation, the humane training techniques. The way that we engage with our animals is, for a lot of people, a reflection on how we would work with their loved ones. So we also want to explore animal welfare and well-being, and those are two very, very different things. When you're talking about welfare, we're really talking about feeding them, watering them, veterinary care, sleeping environments, that kind of stuff. But when we're talking about their well-being, this is really, what are our dog's preferences? Does my dog really want to work in pediatrics? Or maybe my dog wanted to work in pediatrics when it was younger, but now, let's see, she's 7 years old and she's kind of preferring to be with teenagers. And even later in life, she might want to be the dog that hangs out in the lobby with parents as they're all having a meeting. So it's really us giving them quality of life, looking at things like enrichment and, even little things like taking a walk. When you take your dog for a walk, what is that for? Is that for you? Is it for your dog? Is it for both? Have you ever tried to just do a sniff walk and let your dog lead the entire way? it'd be really interesting if you let that happen within reason, because it gives you a lot of information about sort of what dominates their minds. My one Labrador, Clementine, man, she is so into scent. It is crazy. And it's also very funny because when I take her for a walk, we don't go more than a block or two because her head is in every single bush. And that's what makes her happy. Versus another one of my dogs, Widget, she just wants to go, go, go. And it doesn't matter where we go. She just wants to keep moving forward. So two very, very different profiles for a dog, which leads us to creating profiles for our animals. And we need to remember that the profile can change over time. So once you look at those breed specific traits, then you start looking at the individual specific traits. What is it that my dog really enjoys or doesn't enjoy? Just because your dog doesn't enjoy some aspect of the work doesn't mean that they can't do the work. It means that maybe they're not going to be included in that part of the work. But also, this is a place where you can track your preparation and training. This is such a critical part of program development. If something ever went wrong, and when insurance companies investigate, everything is an individual investigation. So they would do things like say, okay, so walk me through this again. You had a dog in the clinic. And why was that? Oh, well, we offer animal assisted therapy. And so you go through, you explain what that is. And then they start asking about your qualifications. How did you learn how to do this? Is this part of your disciplines practice? And then they start asking questions about what was the dog trained for? How was this dog evaluated? And you never know what you're going to get, because when it comes to the insurance world, animal assisted therapy and education, especially because those are the animals that are working in a paid setting, it can get really complicated. You can call 5 or 10 different insurance companies and get 5 or 10 different answers. So it's going to be really, really important that you understand your animal, that you have all of your training logs and evaluation logs, and that those evaluations have been done frequently. I prefer every year because dogs' lives are so short. And I also make sure that I have a third-party objective person come and evaluate my dogs. And so sometimes when some of those colleagues that I know come out to my area for a workshop or something, I'll invite them to stay for a day or two so they can evaluate my staff and, give me some highs and lows and recommendations on things to work on. Otherwise, I can just call in some other trainer and maybe another therapist so that they can together take a look at the program and see if it's doing what it's supposed to be doing with different sets of eyes. So that's it. And I wonder if some of you are following Matilda here. Amanda Stronza is just this incredible woman who just seeps positive relationships with all of her animals. She's a writer and a biologist, and she just takes care of the entire world. So look up Amanda Stronza on Facebook and give them a follow for a while, and you'll get some tips about the human animal bond. Okay, so I am including a couple of graphic photos coming up because I think it's important that people understand the kind of things that happen behind closed doors and how to avoid them. So if you are queasy for any little things, or if your heart just hurts too much to see animals that may be injured, then I would recommend that you just turn away for a few minutes. It's terrible for me, I think, but I know that there is also much worse out there in the world. But, if we don't care about what our dogs are thinking and feeling, then this can be the end result. This young woman was doing a really great thing. She found this dog and decided to foster him. She had known this dog for, 15, 20 minutes. And she started getting into his personal bubble. And so, you can start to see some of the signs here that the dog is not really comfortable with her. And she's pretty oblivious to it. She thinks this dog is really cool, wants to take a picture with him, post it on social media, and find his home. So then start escalating, and you can see the dog's demeanor is changing. And then down here, he just lets her have it. He feels like he gave all the warnings that he could. And this is the result, because she wanted to be up close and lean into a dog that she didn't know. And dogs aren't necessarily comfortable with those kinds of things. We don't actually have people hugging our dogs in my clinic. If people want a hug from a dog, they can get a squish so they can lie on the ground and my dog will lie on top of them. Or they can sit down and the dog will come up behind them and put their paws and head on shoulders. But the dog has control and the dog is able to say no so that we can avoid this kind of thing. A lot of people say, wow, I never saw a warning. He just, jumped up and did it. This dog is so aggressive. Well, the chances are really good. There were a lot of warnings, but the humans didn't know the warnings. So again, it's really, really important for you to get that continuing education and to have a profile of your dog's interests and what they're comfortable with, and to do it very frequently because their working lives are only between 8 and 10 years normally. And in the big scheme of things, shouldn't we be evaluating much more frequently than every 2 years? Okay, so now let's look at some of the animal health, welfare, and well-being policies. Again, there's so many different ways to learn. A lot of the things that you need to understand with with how animals think and how they feel and how they see the world, and also how your interactions shape the way that your sessions are going to go from beginning to end. If you've got a really strong, great relationship with your animals and you can explain that relationship and model that relationship to others, then you're going to have a lot less liability. But we do want to make sure that we understand choices matter to our animals. And, so frequently you can go into a lot of really great clinics or hospitals or, even library programs and people boast about how much their dog really enjoys being there and how much they really like that population, et cetera, et cetera. And then you go in and the dog is tied down so it can't leave, or it moves behind the human handler, and then they're just kind of coaxed back into the session. I think it's really important that we understand consent or agency or independence. There's a lot of different words with a lot of different meanings, but really in the end, it means, are you giving your animals enough choices to participate? Number one, do they want to participate? Number two, how do they want to participate? And number three, how long do they want to participate? You would be really, really surprised. We always tell everybody that at Dogwood, we have an open dog door policy. And we do actually have a dog door where dogs can come and go as they please, out into their play yard. Then we have several different treatment rooms. And if a dog goes and sits by the door, we get to open the door. And, people get really worried about, oh my gosh, well, what would your client think? Well, I think it's a really great time to model for my client, thinking about what others need and what others are thinking about. And I think in 20 years, I've had maybe 5 times where a dog actually left a session, but they always return. So maybe they went out because they heard, the cookie wrappers opening and volunteers were giving the rest of the dogs treats, or they had to go to the bathroom, or, something took their attention, but then the dog actually ended up returning on its own free will. So the goal is to look for signs that your animal is actually enjoying being in whatever kind of sessions that you're doing. And the cool thing that I've learned over the years is that there are a lot of different activities and a lot of different clients that my dogs will choose between. So we have 9 dogs in a clinic with 4 therapists, and that really sounds like a lot, and it kind of is. But they're not necessarily all there at the same time. They're not all working at the same time. But it's interesting because much like the way we choose our population and our specialty area, we have found that our dogs do that too. And so we have one dog who really likes people with complex disabilities. And so if we have somebody with autism and Down syndrome, and they're, flapping and rocking and doing all of this, we've got one dog, he's like, dude, that's my population. I love them. We have another dog who's very cognitive. She likes to solve puzzles. And then we have another dog that is really treat motivated. And so we can do a lot of treat games with that. We have others that are really into freestyle dancing or agility. And so, if we're trying to do some proprioceptive input and some vestibular movement to get sessions going, then those are the dogs we pick. And so it's really interesting if you start logging the things that your dog is interested in, and how long they do it, how long they want to do it. We don't want them to go over threshold because, some of the ball driven dogs can get ball crazy, and, it ends up being a not so good situation because they just don't stop playing ball and they're not even noticing the humans anymore. But again, the goal is to look for signs that your animal is enjoying a session. And if it looks like they're not, that's the greatest time to advocate for them and to just say, gosh, it looks like Clementine is looking for something else. What do you think she might be interested in? And then we start going through things like sounds in the environment or sights or scent, or, maybe she really does just have to go to the bathroom because the last session ran over. So keep a log on those kinds of things so that you can create a much better profile. And I think that also tracking these kinds of things, we do weekly logs on all of the animals. When we say, here are the kind of activities they did, here were the highs, here were the lows. That also helps us to track whether or not an animal may be declining in health or changing interests, or, have an injury or something like that, especially when you have a clinic that has more than one handler. Okay, so then we get into the preparatory phase, and we continue with the resource building, the theoretical foundations of animal-assisted therapy. And this is where I highly recommend you start looking at a literature review, a current literature review, to see what's going on out there in the world, and the kind of things that the researchers are finding in animal-assisted activity therapy and education, because things change quickly. It's important to explore intermediate animal communication, preparation, and training at this time. Things start to look a little more structured. One of the things that I think can be fun for people is doing some of the other evaluations that are out there, like the Canine Good Citizen. But I do want to say, and I know that there are a lot of other speakers that agree with this, there are a lot of things that happen within the Canine Good Citizen and other evaluations that are not actually compatible with what we do in animal-assisted therapy and animal-assisted education. And they're incompatible just because of the job that we do. So you've got to have a pretty flexible animal to do some of these things. If you're going to go through and gain some of these titles, I think it's great to have practice taking tests, but in our practice, we like our dogs to approach the people. We don't allow people to just run up and approach our dogs. Our dogs get to greet them, and we're okay if the dogs are barking because they know their next client is in the lobby. And, for a lot of kiddos, especially the ones that have been bounced around in foster care, it's been very interesting over the years to see the kind of self-confidence and all kinds of other things that just end up brewing in all of these kids because the dog was happy to see them. For a lot of people, the dog is the first person that's ever been happy to see them consistently. So again, we don't want our dogs jumping on people, knocking them over, slobbering, all that kind of stuff. But a little bit of vocalization and excitement is really a great way to get a session going. Whereas those are incompatible. That would be some of the stuff you might see in some of the other animal-assisted activity sort of evaluations. So this is another tool that is really commonly used so that you can kind of present the picture that's in your head to yourself and others and look for things that you might be missing. This is going to sort of describe your solution to a problem. You're going to have a visual statement of your work and how it's going to impact the community. And I always like to say, and the animals. And a logic model is a great way to get everybody on the same page. So there are a lot of forms on the internet that can help you go through and do this. But, you know, in a nutshell, we start with inputs. And these are really, what are the resources that I need to even operate or start a program? And then we move into activities. And so if we have access to resources, then we can accomplish these program activities. And, you know, it just kind of takes us sequentially along development. If the activities are accomplished, then this amount of services will be delivered. So those are your outputs. And then the outcomes are those changes that we expected to see when we were doing our initial treatment plans or educational plans. And then the impact is the outcomes that are achieved in the end. And they're sort of a global practice. Excuse me again. All right, let's see here. So this is a different variation of a logic model. I tend to like colors, but really you start out with a problem statement and say, so what issue is it that this animal-assisted therapy program is going to address? What is it that I'm going to do? What do I need? What do I do? And, you know, what are the things that I need to do first? And then what are some things that can happen later down the road? And again, just making sure that you understand what are the goals? What are the measurable goals that you are going to use to determine whether or not your program is working? So then we move into sort of that supervision and mentoring area. And again, you know, I think for some people it's really important, even if you are a therapist or an educator, to go through animal-assisted activity organizations, get registered, and then go and do some volunteer visiting and learn what populations your animals like, what kind of things bother them. Do they like small spaces, big open spaces? Do they prefer being outdoors? Do they like teenagers, pediatrics, veterans? All of these kinds of things. So that, I think, is a really great use of time. But again, some of those evaluations don't necessarily test for everything. I don't think that there is a test that tests for everything. And in fact, they will test for things that are later going to be incompatible, such as, you know, dogs aren't allowed to approach in some instances and, you know, things like that. So you have to really kind of wrap your mind around the differences in the kinds of evaluations. And if you're a person who thinks you and your dog would benefit from going to start out by just doing volunteer visiting, you're not on the clock, then I would highly recommend it. It's been very successful for several students who have come through our course of training. And for others, it wasn't necessarily beneficial for them because they were further along than that. So that's a choice for you to make. But again, we want to continue to seek out all of those neat networking opportunities and, you know, look for the little mini webinars like this one that can hook you up with additional resources. We also want to make sure that you understand the terminology. The terminology is very, very important. It is not that one area is, you know, better or worse than any other one. It's just that all of the jobs in animal-assisted activity, therapy, and education are very different. And again, even within animal-assisted therapy, two occupational therapists practice very, very differently. So we want to make sure that everybody understands the appropriate use of terminology and what it is that they are doing, because they have very different outcomes. Then it's also really important to understand how to screen potential participants. Just because somebody enjoys animals doesn't mean that they're necessarily a good candidate to participate. And I think I have a couple of slides coming up on that. So this is also a really great time, you know, if you're going out and doing volunteer visiting, it's a great time to practice some of that animal advocacy. And if you see that your dog is not enjoying something, you can say, you know what, it looks like she needs to go outside. We'll be back in 5 minutes, and give your dog a break and reevaluate and see how things go. So when we're looking at introducing new clients to animals at Dogwood, every one of our dogs has a book. And these are just those photo books that you can get on all of the photo programs. You know, when you download your own programs or your own photos into a program and it produces a book or a blanket or whatever. Even drugstores have these kinds of things now available. But every one of our dogs has a book that talks about who they are, how old they are, what they like, their favorite places to be pet, their favorite kinds of activities, things that they're not a big fan of. And it sort of sets up rules for engagement. So we can end up building the animal's profile and putting it into this book in a way that our clients can understand and prepare them for what's okay and for what's not okay. It's also a great way to prevent stress and fatigue. And, you know, one of the other cool things is when you have those longer term clients, they can actually help you do these books. And you don't have to do them as fancy as, you know, a board book. You can print them out in a Word version so that you're updating all the time. But, you know, it's a great way to get our clients to take some perspective of what animals are thinking and feeling. And that might just be a really great step to them doing the same thing with their siblings at home or, you know, family members, something like that. But we want to make sure that everybody understands the rules before they meet your animal. You know, little things like, you know, our rule of we don't let anybody run up to our animals. Our animals get to approach the people. And that takes a little bit of self-control on the part of the kiddos that we see. Okay, so if you want to meet Gertrude, then you can sit right here on this bed, and then she can choose if she wants to come over to you or not. And then if Gertie starts to go over there and the kids start screaming and Gertie stops, well, why do you think Gertie stopped? Oh, I was too loud. Maybe I scared her. Okay, well, let's try again. Invite her over. So pretty easy ways to set people up for success and definitely to set our animals up for success. So when we move into risk assessment and management plans, this is such a big area. If you think about your entire day, every step that you take from the moment that you wake up until you go to bed with your animal and the program, you're just asking what could possibly go wrong. So, you know, one of the things is it might start out, you know, in the car or a parking lot. You know, if you've got a long way to travel and you don't have air conditioning and your dog is sitting in the back seat and, you know, he's not getting enough air and he's very uncomfortable. He's not going to be in a really great place to work that day. Or if you have to park really far away in a really big parking lot at a hospital and the concrete is really hot and his little paw pads are burning, probably not a really great setup for that either. So we want to say, okay, we've got to figure out how to cross this parking lot. There's very few trees here in the desert. How are we going to do this? Well, in my case, I have to train my dog to wear booties and to make sure that I always have water waiting. You know, as soon as we get out of the car and into the building, my dog gets some downtime, gets to cool off, drink, have snack, you know, whatever. Then we also look around the environment. So let's talk about a hospital environment. Let's say that you're in the OTPT and speech therapy gym at Health South. There's a lot of people in a very small environment and lots of action going on. And, you know, people of different ages and different abilities and different things are going to be on the ground. So, you know, looking around the ground and saying, wow, I never realized that there were pills here. That people maybe thought they took, but was stuck to lip and then fell off. Or people that are visiting their loved ones, women will put their purse on the ground and there's, you know, half a sandwich and medications, or there's a candy bar that's made with a substance that can kill a dog. So, thinking about all of these different things, saying, what could possibly go wrong for my dog? Are there religious, cultural beliefs? Are there issues with staff that maybe are not fans of animals? What kind of risk factors are happening with the population that you're working with? Zoonosis are the creepy crawlies inside and outside of the dog or on a person that can be transmitted. Zoophobia, which is fear of animals. And, it's also interesting, the fear of animals. I have had sessions where individuals who were not from the United States come in. They're very grateful to get services. Mom and dad call and say, he's, infatuated with dogs. He loves dogs. And so we think that he'll work out really great with you guys. And we're like, okay. So he comes in, does an evaluation. It turns out it's working out great. He's making progress. And then one of the parents gets a change in schedule, and now grandma is picking up the child. Well, if grandma has religious, cultural, or any kind of beliefs differently than the rest of the family, then you're going to hear it. I've actually had grandma show up to pick up the child, totally undress him, wipe him down with, wet wipes, and put his clothes in a plastic bag and made him go home naked because he touched a dog. And that isn't what the parents would have done. But nobody thought to tell grandma that he was there working with animals, and she doesn't have the same opinion as the rest of the family. So something to think about. We also have to think about the allergies when we're looking at risk assessment. There are so many different allergies, and we're not just talking about people being allergic to dander on the dog, or flea powders or shampoos, or any of those kinds of things. But sometimes what the dog eats or plays with can also be an allergy. There are a lot of people with latex allergies, and a lot of dog toys are made out of that. In our clinic, we make Kongs all the time, and there are chew toys that you get to stuff all kinds of items into, and the dogs find all these surprises. And peanut butter is one of our favorites, but we also have a couple of clients who have peanut allergies, and so obviously we have to rethink that. So really thinking about the commonsensical kinds of things and the things that are not so commonsensical. Of all the people that are allergic to dogs, are they really allergic to their dander, or is it because our dog walks through the garden and gets pollen on them and they're actual seasonal allergies? So we may never know, but learning to get your head to think like that so that you can sort of say, okay, well, this could possibly go wrong, but here's how we're going to manage that. Oops, go. Okay, so there's an article that came out last year that I'm a fan of, and it's Best Practices, Standards, and Animal-Assisted Interventions, and it's called the Lead Risk Assessment Tool. And this is an assessment tool that you just kind of fill out. It's already pre-done. I've given you guys a copy of it. It'll be in the notes section for you to be able to pull up later. And it has a supplement so that you're able to sort of get the ball rolling. It doesn't have every single question or thought, that we've talked about here or that you will learn in other webinars, but it has an awful lot of things to get you started. And it's kind of the first tool of its kind. So I'm a big fan of it. Make sure that you take a look at that. It'll help guide you through. So at Dogwood, this is one page. I think my risk assessment and management tool, I think it's like 15 pages, which seems ridiculous, but I cover everything and make sure that I have a plan for everything. So in this one, you can see we listed the potential issue would be a zoonotic risk factor. Oops. And then here we look at the level of risk. And so like a 5 is critical. It could be very frequent. A 4 is probable. A 3 is occasional. 2 is a marginal or moderate risk. And 1 is negligible. The goal is to take a look at this level of risk and then the likelihood that that thing can happen, and then to identify actions that you're going to do to be able to minimize those risks. And then you get to say, well, now the new risk level is less than it was before. And so this is another really great thing. Should an incident happen, that you can have in your back pocket to say, you know, we have had plans for this, we've been prepared, this is really an isolated incident, here's what we've been doing. Liability organizations really like to see this, whether you're talking about liability with an insurance company or liability within your own company. This is a really great tool to have. And so you can see we talked about allergies here. Other things are fire drills or, you know, dog toys, you know, that are made with latex. We actually have a cabinet full of dog toys that have no latex and no known allergens that we're aware of, that kind of thing. Oops, how come it's not going in? I don't know why it won't change. So, informed consent, confidentiality, being able to list animal-assisted intervention risks, really important. You can lose your license for not doing this kind of stuff. You should have documents that have a couple of different areas in it. One would be grant, and that is where people are granting you permission. Another one is a release, and so that's a release of liability. They understand the risks, they understand the point of your session and what you're trying to achieve, and they accept those risks and give that permission. Then we also have to think about insurance. There's business insurance, and then there's professional liability, workman's comp, pet health. All of these look very, very different depending upon the company that you call. And I think you have to really lay out exactly how you work with your animals and say, here's what could possibly go wrong. While my animal has been trained and evaluated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In the worst case scenario, if my dog backed up and unplugged somebody's life support, what would be covered? Is an ambulance covered? Is aftercare covered? You know, all of those kinds of things, because different insurances cover different things. I think I have 4 different insurance policies to cover my practice, because we also offer dog training, OT, animal assisted therapy, all that kind of stuff. But it's interesting because professional liability sort of covers bad decisions, but business liability, like, you know, if somebody slips on the sidewalk because there's ice and they get hurt, is your business insurance, your business liability that covers it. It's the same thing in my insurance policy. If anybody was to be hurt because of one of my animals, it's my business liability that takes care of it, not the professional liability. So as you are doing your risk assessment plans and looking for insurance, really talk about that risk assessment plan so that you can understand whether or not something like that would be covered. Sorry, guys. Okay, so now let's talk about evaluation of animals. And while most of us are against animal testing, as you can see here, there are some things that need to be done, but math is not one of them. So making sure that your animals are taken care of properly, as far as training goes and liability and all of those things. These are some of the records that I would recommend that you have in place. So first, we want to see your qualifications for doing animal-assisted interventions. So a lot of you have qualifications. Maybe you're a mental health provider or an occupational therapist or a speech therapist or a social worker. We know that you have those qualifications, and that's great. But what kind of continuing education have you taken in the realm of animal-assisted therapy, for example? And then moving off of that, what kind of continuing education have you had where somebody else can lay their eyes on your animal and do an objective evaluation? And this can be for a lot of different things. You know, even if you go and take a rally class or agility or something, you can build a profile that has a lot of different contexts in which your animal has been evaluated. And then that, along with your animal-assisted activity, therapy, or education evaluation, really helps solidify the qualifications for both of you. We also keep veterinary forms. We keep incident forms. You know, if a dog gets hurt by a kid, or a kid gets hurt by a dog or something like that, I mean, even if it's, you know, something as silly as, you know, somebody who was trying to run and jump up on a box in the dog play yard, you know, to try and get to a ball or something, we want to make sure that we can identify that kind of stuff. Or, you know, we sometimes have puppy training classes in our summer programs. And if a puppy chomps a treat too hard and hurts a kid's finger, we want to document that as well. And then make modifications and say, okay, well, this puppy needs a little work by an adult, or, oh, it was totally a fluke because this kid was teasing the dog, and, you know, maybe our volunteer or therapist had their back turned for 30 seconds. We still want to know, what are these incidents? Are there patterns, and how can we take care of them? So we also want to look at the training, evaluation, and reevaluation of humans and animals. And if you think about it, you should be evaluated for your skills with your dog, and then your dog needs to be evaluated, and then you should be evaluated together. I prefer having teams evaluated in context. I can tell you that there are 2 of my dogs that would fail just about any test in the world unless it was given in my clinic where they are comfortable, where they are used to working. The other 3 would do absolutely great just about anywhere, but that's kind of the you know, big key of it. I have the luxury of having a clinic, and I never have to go anywhere else, and it's going to, you know, remain the same. And I've got full control. So I'm able to do all of those evaluations and say, you know, it doesn't necessarily have a lot of meaning if my dog isn't going to be working in other environments to have him do an evaluation in another environment. Now, you know, that being said, it is great to know what your dog will do in a lot of different situations. But we also have to look at the probability of a dog being put into that kind of a situation. So, you know, we track all of our training and evaluations and formal education. We also track our treatment plans and how those are turned into session activities, so that there are modifications for clients, modifications for dogs. And then, you know, we also talk about how we screen participants and look at the letters of permission for animals on site. Does your zoning even allow that? We also look at budgeting and accounting. This is one of those cases where, you know, things went really, really wrong. And somebody did lose their license because she had been working professionally with her dogs in a practice in pediatrics for years. Never did any specialized training. Nothing had ever gone wrong. She just took her kind dogs to work, full of good intentions. And a kid reached down to pet a dog on the way out that was sleeping. The dog got startled and ended up biting the child and severed the kid's earlobe. And it took 3 reconstructive surgeries to repair that. And this is one of those things that could possibly go wrong. Her dogs had been doing great all of these years, apparently, without training. And as the dog aged and, you know, was put in this kind of a situation, sleeping in a hallway, the dog got startled. And, you know, it's too bad, you know, for everybody involved, and it could have been prevented. But, you know, she was charged with causing physical and emotional harm. She was considered incompetent with gross negligence, and she didn't even have any kind of consent to treat forms. There were no mention of risks, benefits, and expected outcomes towards the goals for animal-assisted therapy. So this is a case of how just about everything went wrong, regardless of her intentions. So make sure that you cover all of these kinds of things. Okay, and then, you know, when we get into the animal-assisted therapy and education, this is kind of, you know, that tier where healthcare and human service professionals are really looking at the formal evaluation of participants and doing staff in services and, you know, documentation of service delivery and all of those kinds of things. So not every one of us needs to do these kinds of things, but if you're working within a therapy or an educational setting, these are certainly the things that our disciplines require us to do anyway. So there's a couple of, you know, added things in here like animal welfare and well-being implementation, you know, just saying, okay, what is it that we're going to put into place so that we can guarantee our dogs are having a rest? Because having a dog work for, your full 8-hour day isn't really a good idea. And there should be places for your dog to rest, be away from people, have some enrichment, have some downtime, some quiet time, all of those kinds of things. But yeah, so this list is really for the professionals that are doing this on the clock. Okay, so the process when we're building programs is that you're going to start out doing some of the program planning, and you can look at a lot of the different models for those kinds of things. What is it that what's my goal? How am I going to get there? What are the steps? Then we do a proposal and development. So we talk our bosses into doing a trial of animal-assisted, let's say animal-assisted activities. Even though I'm a therapist, I'm going to say, wouldn't it be really cool to get some of these volunteer visiting teams in here? Let's try it for 3 months and see what happens, because that can also help determine whether a full-fledged animal-assisted therapy program can happen later down the road. So you do your proposal, you get it off the ground, then you do a program review. So you're assessing the outcomes, and those can come by way of staff surveys, reviewing client charts to see if they made progress, looking at what the family members and what your clients have to say about participating in animal assisted, whatever you're doing. And then you get to go through and you make some small changes and modifications. And I think that people really get stuck and really disappointed when they see that animal assisted therapy, for example, doesn't have any better outcomes than some other modality. Well, I think you're looking at it wrong, because what it's saying is that it is just as good as some of the other activities that we do. For me, I've never been able to wrap my head around, going out and saying, well, I'm going to prove that animal-assisted therapy is better than anything else. It doesn't need to be. It just needs to be as good as, so I can offer it as a choice. So with all that being said, in a very short amount of time, I thought I would check in with you all and see if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Melissa. That was fantastic and just chock full of great information. So let me just give folks a minute or two to type out any questions that they might have. And thank you for talking nonstop for sometimes I know that can be tough. So does anybody have any questions for Melissa?
I do. If nobody else is jumping in. Hi, Melissa. Great to see you again. You did an amazing job. I really, every time I talk to you or hear from you, I feel like I take in so much knowledge. So I appreciate the opportunity. I wanted to circle back to one of the points that you made early on, because this is something that we've been sort of going back and forth with our program.